very much for an excellent review, and we're delighted that you have the expertise in the region to help in sort of setting up multidisciplinary teams with the diabetologists on board. Thank you, Dr.
Shukran.
So our next speaker is Professor Andre Floto. Andre is a professor of respiratory biology at the University of Cambridge and is the director of the UK Innovation Hub. Andre is going to talk to us about a very topical issue which people have been grappling about for a while, but maybe the COVID-19 has accelerated its implications. So we're looking forward to your talk, Andre. Telemedicine, the new normal in CF care. It's all you.
Thank you, Basil. Salam alaikum. Right, so I've been asked to talk about telemedicine, the new normal in CF. And I thought it was worth beginning just to reflect on why bother with home monitoring. And I think one of the key issues is the impact on work, life, leisure of people with CF, of having to come to clinic for routine follow-up when they're actually not unwell. And this compromises quality of life enormously. So the idea is perhaps that home monitoring would allow you to bring people into clinic only when required. The other issue, which is where the majority of our focus has been, is the opportunity with home monitoring to begin to see if there are signals that predict the future deterioration in lung health, and therefore the ability to predict exacerbations. And finally, the idea that by monitoring physiological parameters in real time, there's the opportunity to provide physiological feedback to patients to improve adherence to treatment. And certainly we've seen that in terms of adherence to physiotherapy, to nebulizers, and so forth. One of the big issues now with the advent of CFTR modulators is the question of evaluating whether a new medicine works or whether we can safely stop a medicine that the individual's taking. And the ability to be monitoring that again at home provides a huge wealth of information. So home monitoring can provide a mechanism to ensure that they're taking only the medicines that work. And something that's been clearly a big problem over the history of cystic fibrosis is the realization that being in hospital with other patients with cystic fibrosis is a risk in terms of cross-infection. And we've seen numerous examples of that in bacterial infections. And obviously now, as Basil mentioned, with COVID-19, this has really focused our attention on minimizing contact with hospital environments. And finally, it's worth reflecting on the fact that one of the key drivers for our approach has been the desire to empower individuals with CF to take control of their own disease. Okay, so I'll briefly summarize our journey with home monitoring. So we started with a telemed pilot study in 2011 to 13. That was 15 adults in one single center. We had a 6-month study where we monitored a number of physiological parameters and symptom questionnaires. These were the individuals involved in that study. And that prompted us to do a larger study of individuals with CF, again, adults, over a 6-month period with daily monitoring of physiological parameters and symptoms in about 147 adults with cystic fibrosis. So I'll mention that in some detail. And again, these are the individuals involved, and enormous credit needs to go to Janet Allen for driving this program of work forward. And also, I give credit now to John Wynn and our shared PhD student, Damien Sutcliffe. So John works for Microsoft Research. He happens to have cystic fibrosis as well, but they've been able to take the data from SmartCare and begin to generate these predictive algorithms using machine learning. Okay, so where we are at the moment is two things. Firstly, we've helped Jane Davis, who's been leading the study on pediatrics called CLIMB-CF, and that should hopefully report very soon. And we've operationalized the home monitoring system as part of Project Breathe, which was ongoing for about a year before COVID came. And so we were in an opportunity to rapidly deploy our platform to individuals during that period. So the Telemed study, as I say, activity monitor, peak flow, FEV1, pulse ox, weight, symptom diary, 15 patients for 6 months. This is the kind of data that comes out. The IV antibiotics are shown in green, and there's a few reflections that you can come out with immediately. Firstly, that the data is incredibly complex. The second thing, which was surprising actually, was how enthusiastic people were for home monitoring, and obviously the realization that we needed a much larger study. The other factor, since this was about 10 years ago, was that sensor connectivity was critical. These were wired sensors, and the upload of data was very painful. The other thing we asked, which we learned, which was much later, was the fact that because we were able to have daily sputum samples correlated to the physiology, we were able to show the changes in bacteria and chemicals in sputum that preceded the start of the acute pulmonary exacerbation, providing support for the possibility of developing biomarkers. So SmartCareCF, which stopped a few years ago now, was in 7 CF centres in the UK and enrolled, as I say, we were aiming to enroll 150, we ended up with about 147. But the same thing here, daily sputum, now more modern sensors, but the same kind of parameters we were measuring. This is the kind of characteristics of the subjects involved, in keeping with kind of an average section of the UK CF population, and the demographics shown here. And you can see the data uploads up to a maximum of 9 data points a day to 0 for all the participants in the study. And as you'll notice, that there was quite a lot of dropout during the 6-month period, and I'll come back to that later. But certainly we captured a number of exacerbations. So you can see here, this is the number of exacerbations during the 6 months, and that provided us with sufficient data to begin to analyze the results in terms of machine learning predictor. So we were able to test the system, the sensors worked, the data uploaded, and the software worked, not perfectly. Acceptance was really good generally, although there were individuals who developed anxiety and felt that there was too much imposition on top of the burden of care. But overall, most people felt that the home monitoring was helpful or very helpful. And specifically, we were able to generate data that allowed us to predict the prediction, to develop predictive algorithms for machine learning, and to begin to understand how often we needed to take the measurements, and also allow us to think about how we could change delivery of CF outpatient care. So the CF data told us quite a lot, actually. So this is a kind of typical example from one individual on the study, and provides a kind of snapshot of what the normal data set looks like. So you see lung function only on clinic days, the CRP, C-reactive protein during intravenous antibiotics, and that's it. And I'd just like you to contrast that to the wealth of data that we see with home monitoring, showing this deterioration in lung function and in oxygen saturations, in this case, pulse rate, activity, weight, sleep quality, cough, and wellness. So how can we use this data to begin to improve CF care? So one of the issues with looking at the data is the delay between the onset of the deterioration and the start of antibiotics is very variable. So one of the first machine learning tasks was to align these signals so that they all match up, not with when the intravenous antibiotics started, but when the deterioration started. So I'm just showing you here, this chap deteriorates like that and then gets IVs. This chap deteriorates here and gets IVs, and this chap just barely deteriorates and gets IVs. So we're able to align them so they all match up and then average them. And if you do that, then you begin to develop this kind of characteristic profile of what these various parameters do during the exacerbation. And you'll see that in this case, most of the parameters start deteriorating at the same time, but then you see this characteristic kind of partial improvement and then sudden deterioration and then they get intravenous antibiotics. And it turns out that actually there's not one type of exacerbation, but 3 types of exacerbation. There's this typical one where functions deteriorate and then improve and then go down. There's another one where actually, although the symptoms fall, the lung function here shown in red doesn't change very much. And finally, there's this one where you're basically just recovering from a previous exacerbation and then falling away immediately without this partial recovery. So there's quite a lot of biology about exacerbations that we can learn from that. But using this data then, we were able to train a predictive model to develop an output predictor of when an exacerbation was going to happen. So you can see here, this is when the exacerbation starts. This is where the antibiotics start in these 2 patients. And you can see that the predictive algorithm starts firing pretty well immediately as the deterioration begins, and the same in this case. And it turns out that actually the performance of the algorithm is very good, and we reckon that we can predict an exacerbation about 10 or 11 days before conventional treatments. And this I won't dwell on, but it gives you the kind of relative contributions of the various measurements to the predictive algorithm. So now that we have an algorithm, now that we have home monitoring, which we can relay to the CF center and the individuals with CF can see, we can begin to think how we can change clinic delivery. So conventionally, we would have routine clinic reviews. There'd be a deterioration, a call from the patient, and then start emergency antibiotics, and then return back to that model. Our current plan is as follows, that actually, this was obviously pre-COVID, but we were able to skip 1 or 2 clinic reviews, relying on the data coming in from the home monitoring, and then have a quick video clinic from the specialist nurse just to make sure things are okay, relying on the fact that the algorithm might eventually allow us to flag up when a person was becoming ill before they realized it, and to start preemptive antibiotics, and then to return to a kind of much more sparse a virtual clinic / face-to-face clinic. So this is what we're doing at the moment. The algorithm is still in the test mode at the moment, but we are using home monitoring to really improve the data sets and to assist with video clinics. The other thing which I think is perhaps kind of more important in terms of kind of national delivery of services is it allows us to begin to match the increase in the numbers of people with CF centres. So this this map shows you the CF centres in the UK. This is the 250 increase in the UK CF population per year. This is before triple therapy started, so we'd expect that to probably increase really significantly. And those individuals with CF will need to have care provided by a CF centre. So by having home monitoring, you can have less centres with more patients. As I mentioned before, the other key application of home monitoring is safe withdrawal of therapy, and I think this has become really important with the introduction of triple therapy. The other thing that we've been exploring is the way in which we can map this high frequency data from home monitoring with annual patient registry data to provide really rich information about individuals over time, and use that as a mechanism to drive research and development. And I'll briefly mention this, but now that we've got a platform that works, it allows us to try new sensors and see how they'll perform and whether they can improve the prediction. Okay, so thanks to the initial success of this, we were grateful to receive funding from the CF Foundation as well as some other organizations to roll out Project Breathe as a service improvement project. And now we have just under 300 adults at Papworth on home monitoring with the whole kit. We have obviously the rest of the cohort just on spirometers, and rolling this out through all of Wales and all of Scotland. It's a 3-year program. We're now in year 2. So we've been able to roll out the platform, as I mentioned, to other sites. We've improved and augmented the predictive algorithm, and now we begin to innovate with new sensors. And I'll just show you a couple of examples of that. The real world impact of home monitoring, and I say this is prior to the lockdown in March, so we have only very small numbers of patients, but you can see that those individuals, this is comparing 6 months before and 6 months after for an individual, this is the change in lung function. So numerically less reduction, less weight loss, and less requirement for intravenous antibiotics while on home monitoring. So we're very excited by that. And so the other thing we mentioned, as I mentioned, was the operationalization of the algorithm. And so this is what the algorithm looks like now to the patients. And so they'll see 4 conditions: when they're stable, when they're deteriorating, when they're really unwell, and when there's insufficient data. And so you can see here they go green, amber, red, or gray. And so green is fine, carry on. Deteriorating means start your action plan, and we have an individualized action plan for patients to start. Red is you need to contact the CF clinic immediately, and gray is you've not done enough monitoring. We need some more data from you in order to make a prediction. As I say, we're going to trial that in a clinical trial starting next year. And in terms of new sensors, though, we've been very excited to collaborate with a number of companies around the world to see how we can really push the boundaries of monitoring. And so what we want to get to is a purely passive way of sensing for patients with CF. And one of the hopeful new sensors is this radar technology, which just sits on the end of the bed and measures measures respiratory rate and respiratory chest wall movement during sleep, which we think we're able to combine with a number of other passive sensors, such as the activity monitor and resting heart rate, to give us a really robust signal. And we're also excited by the prospect of using voice biopsies, so machine learning voice analysis, to begin to detect the very early signs of a clinical deterioration. And again, these are currently about to be trialed in our centre in Cambridge, but we hope to be able to roll these out if these studies are successful. So in summary then, I think home monitoring in CF is obviously a huge opportunity to provide quality care, perhaps improve the quality of the care while reducing the risks to the individual. Our guiding principles are that this is the patient's data, and we're using it to empower them to take control of their CF. All the platforms are becoming device agnostic, so we're not tied into any single one manufacturer of sensor. It needs to be safe, and that's really important. And I think we've seen deterioration in health of patients with cystic fibrosis during lockdown because they've been reluctant to come into hospital. And we need to be careful of getting that balance right. And obviously the opportunities for the anonymized data to be available to all CF researchers with patients' consent. So I'll stop there and thank our funding bodies, so the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, the CF Foundation, and these other organizations, and the people that did the work, so Josie, Karen, Damien, and and Josie in my lab, our partners within the clinical team at Cambridge, and around the UK, thanks to Janet Allen from the CF Trust who drove the project, Microsoft Research and John Wynn in particular, Microsoft Digital and Magic Bullet that are providing the software platform. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Andre, for a fantastic peep into the future of delivering medical care. I suppose it takes us away from the orthodox conventional way of seeing the doctor physically and the doctor examining you, but obviously this is the way, and it helped us many practices during particularly this pandemic.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that's coming through, Andre, is that how confident are you, or I mean, obviously it's a matter of time, but how confident, what do you think about the correlation or coefficient of agreement between what you're measuring at home with your hospital grade spirometers? Because our FEV1, we're all kind of focused on FEV1
Yeah. Well, so let me break that question down. So we have checked the spirometer quality. So at the same time, using the hospital spirometer and the handheld spirometer. So there is a good correlation. I think there's been some concern because some patients will see a difference on the same day. But if you look at what the lung function, the FEV1 does during a single day, it goes up and down in CF. And even from day to day, there's enormous fluctuation in FEV1, as I think you may have seen in those raw traces. So I think they provide robust longitudinal data. I don't think there is any systematic difference between the home spirometer and the spirometer in hospital. What I will say now, just so that people are aware, although this work has not yet been published, is that FEV1 is a terrible predictor of exacerbations. So in fact, we think we're going to move away from FEV1 to predict exacerbations.
So maybe you'll be looking at a composite measure.
Yes. So everything will be composite, but the interesting thing is that that FEV1 probably won't feature.
Thank you so much, Basil. This is Adel. Thanks. Thank you so much, Andres, for this really fantastic. And I think this is a way that how technology will help in healthcare, especially in the pandemic, such COVID-19. One of the questions: when do you think that this technology will be available commercially worldwide? And do you have any specific age limit? And what about the other language application or interface?
Okay, so great question. So if I take the age limit first, it's very clear from, again, Jane Davis's study in the pediatric population is not published yet, but I think it's fair to say that the signals are different. And I don't think there's an immediate correlation between the work we're doing and the applicability in children. That's number one. The second issue was around availability, and what we'd like to do is to make the app available as soon as possible. We have to go through a CE marking as a medical device, and we're hoping that the clinical trial we're running next year will get us to that point. And once that's available, then we will make all efforts to translate the app into other languages, but we are waiting for the MHRA licensing for that.
That's great, thank you.
And another question there, Andre, how open are you to collaboration in the Gulf region?
Always very open.
That's great news.
So people can contact you if they're interested.
Of course, yes, indeed. Yeah. We're running this. You know, it's the model. Obviously, we needed to engage a commercial partner. So Magic Bullet is an SME spin-off from Microsoft Digital. But we're not. You know, this isn't about making profit. This is about providing free or as close to free as we can things for the CF community. So.
And another question: how about the simplicity or the complexity of the device? Do you think such a device will add to the patient, commitments or burden, or it is very simplified device, smaller?
So that's a really good question. So at the moment, because we're looking to improve the algorithm, we've been asking patients to give us really regular monitoring. But it's very clear from the work that we've done so far is that actually we'll be able to get away with much less monitoring in terms of active monitoring. And as I mentioned, I think we may be in a situation where we can use just passive monitoring, so just a smartwatch for the majority of the time. That triggers an initial signal and then a request for more information, whether it's oxygen sats, spirometer, and so forth. So the total burden once we're finished on the patient, we don't know yet, but we expect it to be much less than we're doing at the moment.
Good.
And we've just finished the talk there before you, Andre, about CFRD.
Yeah.
Do you think the glucose sensing or monitoring would be part of your
Well, so yes, so we at the moment we haven't included the Libra system or equivalent into the app, but that's on the checklist to do. I think the other thing we're hoping to start is a study next year on seeing if blood sugar levels in the non-diabetic patients may give us an early warning to exacerbations, because we anticipate that insulin resistance will increase as lung inflammation increases, and that could be the initial, that could add to the predictive algorithm for exacerbation. So that's what we're working on. As I say, we're hoping to start that Q3 next year.
Fantastic. So watch this space. Andre, then thank you very much for a very insightful and exciting talk, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for inviting me. Okay.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for being with us. Thank you.